The gunshots exploded like thunder behind Willa Macey as she raced through the desert brush, her heart pounding in rhythm with her desperate footsteps. Behind her, 3 bounty hunters closed the distance, their horses' hooves kicking up dust clouds that marked her trail like smoke signals. Arizona Territory, 1878, a place where justice was often nothing more than a bullet from the fastest gun, and Willa had never felt its cruel truth more keenly than now. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath as she crested a small rise. In the fading light of dusk, she spotted a small ranch house standing alone against the backdrop of the painted desert outside Douglas, Arizona Territory. It wasn't much, just a modest wooden structure with a barn and corral nearby, but it represented her only hope. There she is. A gruff voice called out from behind her. $500 alive, boys. Willa ducked into a cluster of scrub brush, thorns tearing at her already tattered dress. $500, the price on her head for a crime she didn't commit. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same men hunting her had probably committed worse offenses before breakfast. As darkness fell, she made her desperate dash toward the ranch house, praying its occupant wouldn't shoot first and ask questions later, a common enough occurrence in these parts. The bounty hunters had fallen back to water their horses at a creek she'd passed a mile back, but they wouldn't be long. She had minutes, not hours. The ranch was quiet as she approached. A single horse stood in the corral, occasionally pawing at the ground. No dogs barked an alarm, which she counted as providence. When she reached the porch, she hesitated only a moment before knocking, her knuckles rapping softly against the weathered wood. The door swung open suddenly, and Willa found herself staring into the steel-blue eyes of a tall man holding a Winchester rifle loosely in his hands. His face, partially hidden beneath a well-worn hat, showed surprise that quickly transformed into caution. "Please," Willa gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "They're coming. Bounty hunters. I didn't do what they claim. Please help me." The man's gaze moved past her to scan the darkening horizon. He seemed to make a decision in that instant, stepping back from the doorway. "Get in," he said, his voice low and graveled. "Name's Quinn Newell, and you'd better have a damn good explanation." Willa stumbled inside, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. The interior was simple but clean: a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a few shelves lined with books, surprising her. Not many ranch hands out here took to reading. Quinn closed the door behind them, moving to the window to peer out into the gathering darkness. "They close." "Not more than 10 minutes behind me," Willa answered, clutching at a chair for support. "3 of them. Led by a man called Barnett." Quinn's jaw tightened at the name. "Wade Barnett," she nodded. "Meanest son of a," Quinn caught himself. "Pardon my language, madam." "That man's not a bounty hunter. He's a killer with a license." Rapid hoofbeats suddenly sounded in the distance. Quinn's expression hardened as he grabbed her arm, surprisingly gentle despite his urgency. "Listen carefully," he said, leading her across the room to a small rug in the corner. He pulled it back to reveal a trapdoor. "Down here. It's my cellar. Used to be a storage space, but I keep some supplies there now. It's not comfortable, but it's safe." He lifted the door to reveal a wooden ladder descending into darkness. "There's a lantern at the bottom. Don't light it until you're sure I've closed this tight, and whatever happens up here, don't make a sound." Willa hesitated. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Quinn's eyes met hers, and something unreadable passed between them. "I know Barnett. That's enough for now. We'll sort the rest later." Without another word, Willa descended the ladder. The cellar was cool and smelled of earth and preserved foods. She heard the trapdoor close above her and the scrape of the rug being replaced. She found the lantern exactly where Quinn had said it would be, and waited several agonizing minutes before striking a match to light it. The small flame revealed a space about 10 feet square, lined with shelves holding jars of preserved fruits and vegetables. A small cot sat against one wall with a wool blanket folded at its foot. There were several crates stacked neatly in one corner, and what appeared to be a small collection of books on a makeshift shelf. This wasn't just a cellar, it was prepared as a hideaway. Above, she heard the thunder of approaching horses, then the muffled sound of men's voices. She extinguished the lantern and sat in darkness, straining to hear what transpired overhead. Quinn watched from his window as 3 riders pulled up outside his ranch house. He recognized Wade Barnett, immediately a tall, lean man with a face like weathered leather and eyes as cold and merciless as a rattlesnake's. The other 2 were typical hired guns, one young and eager, the other older with the dead-eyed look of a man who'd killed too many times to count. He grabbed a half-empty bottle of whiskey from his shelf and took a quick swig before answering their pounding on his door. Quinn arranged his features into a look of annoyed curiosity as he opened it. "Evening, gentlemen," he drawled. "What brings you to my door at this hour?" Barnett didn't waste time on pleasantries. Tracking a fugitive. Woman, about 25, brown hair. Seen anyone matching that description? Quinn took another deliberately slow sip from his bottle. "Can't say that I have. Been working my south pasture all day. Just got in about an hour ago." The younger bounty hunter pushed forward. "Mind if we look around?" "As a matter of fact, I do mind," Quinn replied, his voice hardening. "This is my property, and unless you've got a warrant—" "We don't need a warrant," Barnett cut in. "We're authorized by the territorial marshal to apprehend this woman." Quinn leaned against his doorframe. "Is that so? And what this woman do?" "Murdered her husband in Silver City. Shot him while he slept, then stole his money and ran." Barnett's eyes narrowed. $500 reward. Quinn gave a low whistle. "Must have been an important man." "Rich man," the older bounty hunter corrected. "Mining investor." Quinn nodded slowly. "Well, as tempting as $500 sounds, I can't help you. Haven't seen any women, murderous or otherwise." Barnett didn't look convinced. "Mind if we water our horses at your well?" "Help yourself," Quinn replied. "Then I'd appreciate you moving on. Got an early start tomorrow." As the men moved toward the well, Quinn noticed Barnett giving a subtle nod to the younger hunter, who began drifting toward the back of the house. Quinn stepped out onto his porch, his rifle casually cradled in his arms. "Your water's this way, friend," he called, gesturing with the rifle's barrel toward the well. "No need to be wandering around my property." The young man hesitated, then rejoined his companions. Quinn kept his position on the porch, watching as they watered their horses. Barnett mounted up first, fixing Quinn with a hard stare. "If you see her, Newell, you'd be wise to let us know. She's dangerous." Quinn tipped his hat. "I'll keep that in mind." He stood on his porch long after they'd ridden away, making certain they weren't doubling back. Only when he was satisfied did he return inside and lock his door. In the cellar below, Willa had pressed herself against the wall directly beneath the trapdoor, straining to hear the conversation. She caught only fragments. "Murdered her husband. $500 reward. Dangerous." Each word made her stomach clench tighter. When silence finally fell, she didn't dare move, uncertain whether the bounty hunters had truly left or if Quinn had betrayed her. The sudden scraping of the rug made her jump. Light spilled into the cellar as the trapdoor lifted, and Quinn's face appeared in the opening. "They're gone," he said. "For now." Willa climbed the ladder with trembling limbs. Once she reached the top, she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally ebbing away and leaving her exhausted. Quinn busied himself at the stove, adding wood to rekindle the fire. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted. Before I realized they were on my trail. He nodded without comment and set a pot of beans to warm. He sliced some bread from a loaf on the counter and put a plate before her. "Eat," he said simply. "Then we'll talk." Willa ate gratefully, trying not to bolt the food despite her hunger. Quinn sat across from her, his gaze steady but not unkind. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Quinn leaned back in his chair. "Now it's time for that explanation. Barnett says you murdered your husband." Willa's eyes flashed with anger. "I didn't kill William. He was alive when I left our home that night." "Then why the bounty?" She took a deep breath. "William Macey was a wealthy man when I married him. I was 20, naive, the daughter of a shopkeeper who'd fallen on hard times. William was 45 and promised security, respect. What he delivered was," she faltered, "different." Quinn waited, his expression unreadable. He had a temper. "And investments that weren't paying out as he'd hoped. The combination made our home difficult." She unconsciously rubbed her wrist, where the faint outline of a healed bruise was still visible. "That night we argued about money. He'd been drinking heavily. I went to stay with my friend Sarah for the night, something I'd done before when things got bad." She looked directly at Quinn. "The next morning the sheriff was waiting for me at Sarah's door. William had been found dead, shot with his own pistol. The house had been ransacked, his safe emptied. I was the obvious suspect." "And you ran," Quinn observed. "I panicked," she admitted. "The sheriff was William's closest friend." Everyone in town knew William as a respectable businessman. No one knew what happened behind closed doors. My word against a dead man's reputation. I didn't stand a chance. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. "You know who did it?" Willa shook her head. "William had business partners. Men he'd argued with recently over failed investments. But I can't prove anything." "So you're running blind. No destination in mind." "I was heading to California," she said. "My mother's sister lives in San Francisco. I thought perhaps I could start over there where no one knows me." Quinn stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. "Barnett won't give up easily. $500 is a small fortune out here." "I can leave at first light," Willa offered. "I've imposed enough." Quinn turned to face her. "And go where?" "On foot, with bounty hunters combing the territory for you." He shook his head. "No, you'll stay here for now. The cellar's safe if they return. We'll figure out the next step when we're not both dead tired." Relief flooded through Willa, though uncertainty quickly followed. "Why would you risk this for a stranger? They could arrest you for harboring a fugitive." A ghost of a smile crossed Quinn's face. "Let's just say I've got my reasons to dislike men like Barnett, and I've never been one to turn away someone in need." He gestured toward the small bedroom off the main room. "You take the bed. I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "You look ready to collapse, and that cot in the cellar isn't fit for a proper rest." Too exhausted to argue further, Willa nodded gratefully. As she entered the small bedroom, she noticed a framed photograph on the simple wooden dresser, a woman with a kind smile, holding an infant. "My sister and her boy," Quinn said from the doorway, having noticed her interest. "They live in Tucson now. That's about all the family I've got left." Willa turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Newell, truly." "Quinn," he corrected. "Just Quinn." "Quinn," she echoed softly. "I'm Willa Macey, though I suppose I should consider using another name." He nodded. "Get some rest, Willa. Morning comes early out here." When the door closed behind him, Willa sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. She had trusted her safety to a stranger, a man who might yet turn her in for the reward money. And yet, something in his eyes told her he wouldn't. There was a steadiness to Quinn Newell that she hadn't encountered in a long time. As she lay down on the unfamiliar bed, She realized it was the first time in years she'd felt truly safe. Quinn sat at his table long after Willa had gone to bed, nursing a small glass of whiskey and considering his unexpected guest. Her story rang true to his ears. He'd seen enough of the world to recognize authentic fear and genuine desperation. But harboring her posed risks, he couldn't ignore. Wade Barnett's presence complicated matters significantly. Quinn and Barnett had bad history dating back to the war. Barnett had been a Union soldier like Quinn. But while Quinn had fought honorably, Barnett had used the chaos of war to indulge his darker impulses, torturing prisoners, and on one occasion that Quinn had witnessed, executing surrendered Confederate soldiers. Quinn had reported him, testified against him at the military tribunal. Barnett had been discharged dishonorably, but had escaped imprisonment through connections. He'd never forgotten Quinn's role in his disgrace. If Barnett discovered Quinn was hiding Willa, his pursuit would become personal. Deadly personal. Yet sending her away wasn't an option Quinn could stomach. He'd seen too many innocents suffer during the war and in the chaotic years after. His conscience wouldn't allow him to abandon her to Barnett's mercies. With a sigh, he extinguished the lamp and stretched out on his bedroll near the stove. Tomorrow, he decided, they would need a plan. Morning brought the scent of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. Willa opened her eyes to sunlight streaming through a small window. For a moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She rose quickly, smoothing her wrinkled dress as best she could before emerging from the bedroom. Quinn stood at the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron pan. He looked up at her approach. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said. "Figured you could use a solid breakfast." "Thank you," Willa replied, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance. "May I help?" He nodded toward a kettle. "Coffee's ready if you want to pour." They worked in comfortable silence, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease, as though they'd done this dance many times before. When they sat down to eat, Quinn outlined what he'd been considering. "Barnett and his men will be searching the area for at least a few days," he explained. "They'll likely circle back here too, especially if they don't find any sign of you elsewhere." Willa nodded, her appetite diminishing at the thought. "I think you should stay in the cellar during daylight hours, at least for now," Quinn continued. "I've got work to do around the ranch that can't wait, cattle to check, fences to mend. If anyone rides up while I'm out, they won't find you." "And at night?" Willa asked. "At night, we'll need to be ready to hide you quickly if necessary. I've got some spare clothes that might help disguise you if we need to move. They'll be too big, but better than that torn dress for traveling." "You're suggesting I stay?" Willa couldn't hide her surprise. Quinn met her gaze directly. "For now. At least until we can figure out a safer way to get you to California." He hesitated. "I know a few people who might help, good people who don't ask questions, but reaching out to them takes time." Willa studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why are you doing this?" Quinn was quiet for a moment. "I believe your story," he said finally, "and I've seen what happens when good people stand by while injustice runs its course." A shadow passed over his face. "Did too much of that during the war." "You fought," he nodded. "Union Army, saw things I wish I hadn't." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, staying here buys us time to consider options." Willa reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden longer than necessary." A slight smile touched his lips. "Let's get through today first." The day passed slowly for Willa, confined to the cellar with only a few books for company. Quinn had brought down a lantern, water, food, and a chamber pot, making the space as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. Still, The hours dragged as she listened to the occasional sounds of Quinn moving about overhead, then silence when he left to tend his ranch. Late in the afternoon, she was startled by the rapid opening of the trapdoor. Quinn's face appeared, his expression urgent. "Riders coming," he said. "Stay quiet." The trapdoor closed before she could respond. Willa extinguished her lantern and sat in darkness, straining to hear what transpired above. The muffled sound of voices reached her, then footsteps moving across the floor directly overhead. She held her breath as the footsteps paused near the trapdoor, then continued on. After what seemed an eternity, the trapdoor opened again, and Quinn's face appeared, relief evident in his features. "Just some cowboys passing through," he explained, helping her up the ladder. "Looking for work. But we need to be careful." That evening, as they shared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of the bacon, Quinn told her more about his ranch. "It's not much," he said. "Just 40 acres with a small herd of cattle. Been here 4 years now. Came west after the war looking for something different. Peace," Willa suggested. Quinn considered this. "Maybe, or just space to breathe. The war took a lot out of everyone who fought in it." "You've made a good home here," Willa observed, looking around the modest but well-kept cabin. "It's coming along," he agreed. "Another year or two I might add on a proper second bedroom, maybe expand the barn." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before everything, what was your life like?" Willa stared into her coffee cup. "I worked in my father's general store in Silver City until he died 3 years ago. Left in debt. William was a customer who'd always been kind to me. When he proposed, it seemed like Providence." She gave a humorless laugh. "My mother had died when I was 16. I had no siblings, no other family nearby. William offered security, respectability. But not happiness," Quinn observed quietly. Willa shook her head. "That wasn't part of our arrangement, though I'd hoped." She trailed off. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters," Quinn said firmly. "Everyone deserves happiness, Willa." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What about you?" she asked. "No wife waiting for you to expand that second bedroom?" Something flickered in his eyes. "No. There was someone once. Emily. She didn't much care for ranch life, returned east after 6 months. I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It was for the best. She belonged in Boston with her family, not out here in the dust and heat." He stood and gathered their plates. "We should turn in. Dawn comes early." That night, as Willa lay in Quinn's bed, she found herself thinking about him more than her precarious situation. There was something compelling about the quiet rancher, a depth of character that spoke of experiences both painful and profound. In just 2 days, she'd come to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. The realization was as comforting as it was frightening. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Willa would spend the daylight hours in the cellar while Quinn tended to his ranch work. In the evenings, they would share a meal and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Quinn told her about his boyhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the Army, and his journey west. Willa shared stories of her childhood in Silver City, her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, and her love of books. On the 4th evening, Quinn returned with news. "Ran into Tom Miller in town today," he said as they ate. "He's a friend who runs the general store in Douglas. Says Barnett and his men have moved on toward Tucson, following a report that a woman matching your description was seen on the stage heading that way." Relief washed over Willa. "So they're not looking nearby anymore." "Seems that way," Quinn replied. "Though I wouldn't count on them giving up entirely. But it might mean you can come up from the cellar during the day now. Must be getting tiresome down there." "It's not so bad," Willa said, though the prospect of freedom from the confined space made her heart leap. "I've been reading your books." You have quite a collection for a rancher." Quinn looked slightly embarrassed. "Always had a fondness for reading. My mother was a school teacher before she married, made sure my sister and I appreciated books." "I noticed you have the Count of Monte Cristo," Willa said. "It's one of my favorites." "Mine too," Quinn admitted. "Something about a man wrongfully accused fighting to clear his name." He trailed off, glancing at her. "Hits differently now, I suppose." They shared a smile of understanding that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Willa felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her fugitive status. The next day marked a change in their routine. Instead of descending to the cellar after breakfast, Willa remained above ground. Quinn showed her around his modest ranch, the barn with its 4 horses, the chicken coop that provided eggs, and the small vegetable garden he maintained. "Not much of a gardener," he confessed as they walked among the neat rows of tomatoes, beans, and squash. "But it saves trips to town." "It's impressive," Willa assured him. "My attempts at growing anything usually end in disaster." Quinn laughed, a rich, warm sound that Willa realized she hadn't heard before. It transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I could use a hand mending some fence today," he said. "If you're willing. Be good to have company for a change." Willa readily agreed, changing into the spare clothes Quinn had provided, a shirt and trousers that she cinched at the waist with a piece of rope. The clothes swam on her frame, but the freedom of movement was liberating after years in restrictive dresses. Working alongside Quinn under the Arizona sun, passing him tools and helping to hold posts while he secured them, Willa felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in a long time. Quinn was patient, explaining what he was doing and why, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled with a task. By midday, they'd repaired a good section of fence, and Quinn suggested they break for lunch in the shade of a large cottonwood tree near a small creek that ran through his property. "This is beautiful," Willa said, looking out over the landscape. The rugged mountains in the distance, the golden grassland dotted with cattle, the clear blue sky stretching endlessly above it held a stark beauty unlike anything she'd known in Silver City. "It grows on you," Quinn agreed, passing her a canteen of water. "First year I was here, all I could see was the hardship, the heat, the drought, the isolation. Now I see the freedom." Willa took a long drink. "Freedom," she echoed. "Something I haven't felt in a very long time." Quinn studied her, his expression thoughtful. "What will you do if you make it to California? Once you're safe?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, she hadn't truly considered what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work, I suppose. I have experience in a general store. Or perhaps as a seamstress." "Is that what you want, to work in a store or sew dresses?" Willa looked out over the landscape, considering his question. "What I want," she began slowly, "is to never again be dependent on someone else for my survival, to make my own choices. To wake up without fear." She glanced at him. "Is that too much to ask?" "Not at all," Quinn said quietly. "Sounds like exactly what everyone should have." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance and the gentle rustle of leaves overhead. When they'd finished, neither seemed eager to return to work. "Tell me something, Quinn," Willa said suddenly. "Something you've never told anyone else." He raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a request." "We've shared meals, conversation, and now work," she pointed out. "Yet I feel there's so much I don't know about you." Quinn leaned back against the trunk of the cottonwood, his hat tipped forward to shade his eyes. For a moment, Willa thought he wouldn't answer. "I write poetry," he said finally, his voice so low she almost didn't hear him. "Poetry." Willa couldn't hide her surprise. A faint flush colored his tan cheeks. Nothing worth reading, just thoughts that come to me sometimes, usually at night, about the land, the stars, things I've seen. I'd like to read them someday, Willa said softly. Quinn met her gaze and something unspoken passed between them. Maybe someday, he agreed. They returned to work, but something had shifted between them, a barrier lowered, a trust deepened. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, Willa found herself watching Quinn more often than the fence they were repairing. The way his strong hands worked the wire, the concentration in his eyes, the occasional smile he cast her way, all of it stirred feelings she hadn't expected to experience again. That evening, as they prepared supper together, their movements around the small kitchen had the ease of a dance long practiced. Quinn showed her how he made biscuits from his mother's recipe, and Willa contributed by preparing a stew from the vegetables in his garden. "You're good at this," Quinn observed as she expertly chopped carrots. "Cooking was the one household task I actually enjoyed," she admitted. "William had a housekeeper who did most of it, but sometimes I would join her in the kitchen. It was a refuge in a way." As they ate, Quinn brought up a subject they'd been avoiding. "We need to think about your next steps," he said. "I can't keep you here indefinitely. Sooner or later, someone will notice or Barnett will circle back." Willa nodded, though the thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang. "I've been thinking about that. The stage to Tucson runs through Douglas twice weekly. From there, I could catch the train west." "You'd need money," Quinn pointed out, "and papers. Barnett will have alerted the authorities to watch for you." "I have a little money," Willa said. "I managed to grab some before I fled. Not much, but enough for a ticket, perhaps." Quinn shook his head. "It's too risky. The stations will be watched." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I have a friend, James Coopperton, runs a supply wagon between here and California, makes the trip monthly. He's trustworthy and he owes me a favor." "You trust him with my secret, with my life," Quinn affirmed. "He passes through Douglas in about a week. If you traveled with him, hidden among his supplies, you could reach California safely." It was a solid plan, Willa had to admit. Safer than traveling openly on public transportation. Yet the thought of leaving Quinn and the sanctuary of his ranch filled her with a sadness she hadn't anticipated. "A week," she murmured. "So I have a week too." She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "To rest," Quinn supplied. "To regain your strength for the journey ahead," he hesitated. "And to help me finish that fence if you're willing. Your knot-tying skills have proven invaluable." Willa smiled, grateful for his attempt to lighten the moment. "I'd be happy to help with the fence. And anything else you need around the ranch." That night, as Willa prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above Quinn's dresser. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the one who had arrived desperate and terrified 4 days earlier. There was color in her cheeks, a light in her eyes that had been absent for years. The borrowed man's clothing should have made her look ridiculous, yet somehow it suited her, practical, unconfined, honest, like Quinn himself. The realization that she was developing feelings for him shouldn't have surprised her, yet it did. After William, she'd believed that part of her heart had withered beyond recovery. Yet here it was, coming alive again in the most unexpected place and time. A complication she hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching Arizona day. Quinn had already left the cabin when Willa awoke, leaving a pot of coffee warming on the stove, and a note explaining he'd gone to check on a heifer that was close to calving. Willa used the opportunity to wash her hair using the basin on the porch and a precious bit of Quinn's soap. As she stood in the morning sun, letting her hair dry, she contemplated the ranch spreading out before her. It wasn't large or grand by any measure, but there was something deeply appealing about its modest self-sufficiency. Quinn had carved out a life here through hard work and determination. It was a life of integrity, of purpose, a life she could imagine sharing, had circumstances been different. She pushed the thought away and turned her attention to practical matters. She decided to surprise Quinn by preparing a substantial midday meal for when he returned. The garden yielded fresh vegetables, and she found cornmeal and dried beef in his pantry that would make a hearty stew. She was so absorbed in her cooking that she didn't hear the approach of horses until they were nearly at the cabin. Freezing in momentary panic, she peered cautiously through the window. Two men she didn't recognize were dismounting in the yard. Not Barnett or his men, but strangers nonetheless. The Cellar. She needed to hide. She had just enough time to remove the pot from the stove before a knock sounded at the door. Heart pounding, she slipped across the floor and quietly lifted the trapdoor, descending the ladder as silently as possible. She pulled the door closed above her just as she heard the cabin door open. "Hello, Quinn, you home?" A male voice called out. Willa held her breath in the darkness, straining to hear. "Looks like he's out," another voice replied. "Should we wait?" "Might as well. He's expecting us. Said he had that mare ready to sell." Footsteps moved around overhead, and Willa pressed herself against the earthen wall, praying they wouldn't discover the trapdoor. She heard the scrape of chairs as the men apparently decided to make themselves comfortable. "Something's cooking," one observed. "Must be planning to return soon." "Hope so. Got a long ride back to town." The conversation continued above her, idle talk about cattle prices and local gossip. Willa remained frozen, afraid that any movement might alert them to her presence. After what seemed an eternity, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, then Quinn's voice greeting the visitors. "Martin, Dave. Sorry to keep you waiting. Had a heifer calving down by the creek." "No trouble," one of the men, Martin, presumably replied. "We helped ourselves to your shade." "Hope you don't mind." "Not at all." "You're here about the mare." The conversation moved outside, much to Willa's relief. She remained in the cellar, unwilling to risk emerging until she was certain the visitors had departed. Through the floorboards, she could hear muffled voices as Quinn presumably showed the men the horse he was selling. It was nearly an hour later when the trapdoor finally opened, revealing Quinn's concerned face. "They're gone," he said, helping her up. "I'm sorry about that. I forgot they were coming today." "It's all right," Willa assured him, though her legs were stiff from crouching in the confined space. "Who were they?" "Ranchers from near Douglas. Martin Holloway and his foreman, Dave Perkins. Good men, but not ones I'd trust with your secret. Too fond of gossip." He noticed the pot on the stove. "You were cooking," Willa nodded. "I thought I'd have a meal ready when you returned. I hope the stew isn't ruined." Quinn checked the pot. "Looks fine, just needs reheating." He turned to her, his expression serious. "That was a close call. Reminds me we need to be more careful." Willa echoed. "Until you leave," Quinn clarified, though something in his eyes suggested he'd meant more than that. "Let's finish that stew. I'm starved after wrestling with that stubborn heifer all morning." As they ate, Quinn told her about the successful calving and his sale of the mare to Martin Holloway. Willa listened, finding comfort in the ordinary details of ranch life. Yet beneath the conversation ran an undercurrent of awareness that her time here was limited, that soon she would move on, leaving this unexpected interlude behind. The thought left an ache she hadn't anticipated. The next day, they rode out together to check on Quinn's cattle. He'd loaned her one of his gentler horses, a dun mare named Sunny, and spent time showing her how to saddle and mount properly. Willa had ridden occasionally in Silver City, but never with any great skill or confidence. Under Quinn's patient guidance, however, she found herself enjoying the experience. "You're a natural," he observed as they rode side by side across a grassy meadow. "Just need practice." Willa laughed, feeling the sun on her face and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. "Is that your assessment of my horse riding or my fence mending?" "Both," Quinn replied with a smile. "You adapt quickly. That's a valuable trait out here." They stopped on a rise overlooking a small valley where a dozen or so cattle grazed peacefully. Quinn explained his plans to expand the herd gradually, to build something that could sustain him in the years to come. "It's not an easy life," he admitted. "Drought, disease, rustlers, plenty of ways to lose everything you've worked for. But there's something about building something from nothing that gets in your blood." "I can understand that," Willa said softly. "The desire to create something that's truly yours." Quinn glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "What would you create, Willa, if you could build any life you wanted?" It was a question she'd rarely allowed herself to consider. With William, dreams had seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. Now, faced with Quinn's earnest inquiry, she found herself imagining possibilities long suppressed. "A home," she said finally. "Not just a house, but a true home, a place of safety and joy." She met his gaze. "And perhaps a garden that actually thrives, unlike my previous attempts." Quinn laughed, but his eyes remained serious. "Sounds like a fine dream, and you?" she asked. "Is this ranch the fulfillment of your dream?" "Part of it," he acknowledged. "The land, the cattle, making something sustainable, yes. But a ranch needs more than one pair of hands to truly thrive." He looked away, scanning the horizon. "A family should be part of it. Children to pass it on to someday." The admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken implications. Willa felt her heart quicken but didn't trust herself to respond. They rode in companionable silence back toward the ranch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. As they approached the cabin, Quinn suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "Someone's been here," he said quietly, pointing to fresh hoofprints in the dirt yard. Willa felt a chill of fear. "Barnett?" "Can't tell. Wait here." Quinn dismounted and handed her his reins, then drew his pistol from its holster. He approached the cabin cautiously, circling it once before checking the barn. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Someone searched the place. Nothing seems to be missing, but they went through everything." "Looking for me," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn nodded. "Most likely." He took the reins back from her. "We need to get you somewhere safer than the cellar, at least for tonight." He led her to a densely wooded area behind the barn, following a barely visible path until they reached a small clearing. There, partially hidden by underbrush, stood a crude one-room cabin. "My first home," Quinn explained as he pushed open the door. "Built it when I arrived, before I had the means to construct the main house. Not much, but it's solid, and no one would think to look here." The interior was Spartan, a narrow cot, a small table with a single chair, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Dust covered everything, evidence that it had been unused for some time. "I'll bring bedding and food," Quinn said. "And my rifle. If whoever was here returns, they won't find you." Willa caught his arm. "What about you? If it was Barnett, you could be in danger." "I can handle Barnett," Quinn assured her, though the hardness in his voice suggested a history Willa didn't fully understand. "Stay here. I'll return after dark." Left alone in the small cabin, Willa busied herself cleaning away the dust and cobwebs. The physical activity helped calm her racing thoughts. Someone had been searching for her. Her brief respite of safety was over. As twilight descended, bringing with it the cooling desert air, Willa sat by the small window, watching for Quinn's return. When a shadow finally detached itself from the trees, she felt a flood of relief that quickly turned to alarm as she realized the approaching figure wasn't Quinn. It was Wade Barnett. Willa shrank back from the window, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain he would hear it. How had he found this place? Where was Quinn? Barnett paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the area. The small cabin, with its weathered exterior, blended well with the surrounding vegetation. If he didn't know exactly what he was looking for, there was a chance he might miss it. She held her breath as Barnett took a step toward the cabin, then froze at the sound of a twig snapping elsewhere in the woods. He turned toward the noise, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Barnett," Quinn's voice called from the darkness. "Looking for something." Barnett whirled, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "Newell, should have known you'd be mixed up in this. Where is she?" "Don't know what you're talking about," Quinn replied, stepping into the clearing. He held his rifle casually, but Willa could see his finger resting near the trigger. "Though I do know you've been trespassing on my property." "Cut the act," Barnett snarled. "The woman who killed Willa Macey, you're hiding her." "And if I was?" Quinn's voice was calm, but Willa could detect the tension underlying it. "What business is it of yours? You're not a lawman, Barnett." "Just a hired gun." Barnett's laugh was cold. $500 says it's very much my business, and once I bring her in, I might just come back for you. Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense." "So is trespassing," Quinn countered, "and threatening a man on his own land." The two men faced each other, the tension between them palpable even from Willa's hidden vantage point. She knew she should remain concealed, yet the thought of Quinn facing Barnett alone because of her was unbearable. Before she could act, the standoff was interrupted by the arrival of two more riders, Barnett's companions. They reined in at the edge of the clearing, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Found anything, boss?" the younger one called. "Not yet," Barnett replied, his eyes never leaving Quinn. But Newell here was just about to be more cooperative. "Weren't you, Quinn?" Quinn's stance didn't waver. "I think you boys have worn out your welcome. Time for you to move on." "Or what?" Barnett challenged. "It's 3 against 1, Newell. Even you can't like those odds." What happened next unfolded so quickly Willa barely had time to register it. Quinn dropped to one knee as the first shot rang out, not from Barnett, but from the younger bounty hunter. The bullet whistled over Quinn's head as he returned fire, his shot striking the young man in the shoulder and knocking him from his horse. Barnett fired twice in rapid succession, forcing Quinn to roll behind a fallen log for cover. The third bounty hunter dismounted, using his horse as a shield as he fired toward Quinn's position. Willa watched in horror as the exchange of gunfire continued, bullets splintering wood and kicking up dirt. Quinn was outnumbered and outflanked. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the stove and slipped out the back window of the cabin. Moving as quietly as possible, she circled behind Barnett, who was so focused on Quinn that he didn't notice her approach until it was too late. With all her strength, she brought the poker down on his gun hand. Barnett howled in pain, his pistol dropping to the ground. He whirled to face her, his expression contorted with rage and surprise. "You," he spat, lunging for her. Willa swung the poker again, striking him across the temple. Barnett staggered but didn't fall. Blood streamed down the side of his face as he reached for her, his injured hand forgotten. "Willa, down!" Quinn's voice cut through the chaos. She dropped to the ground as a shot rang out. Barnett jerked backward, a look of disbelief crossing his features before he crumpled to the earth. The remaining bounty hunter, seeing his leader fall, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. The young man Quinn had wounded was struggling to stand, his face pale with shock and pain. Quinn approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the surrendering man. "Kick that pistol away," he ordered, nodding toward the gun at the man's feet. The bounty hunter complied. "Don't shoot. We're done." Quinn glanced at Willa, relief flooding his features when he saw she was unharmed. "You all right?" she nodded, still clutching the poker. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the question, looking at Barnett's still form. "Dead," Quinn confirmed grimly. He turned back to the remaining bounty hunters. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your friend and Barnett's body and ride out of here. You're going to tell whoever asks that Barnett got killed in a shootout with a rival bounty hunter over the reward money. Understand?" The older man nodded quickly. "What about the woman?" "The reward? There is no reward," Quinn cut him off. "Not for you, not after this. Consider yourselves lucky I'm not turning you over to the law for attempted murder." The man hesitated, then nodded again. "Help me with Jimmy," he said to the wounded younger man. "Can you ride?" The young hunter nodded weakly. Together they managed to get Barnett's body draped over his horse. Quinn watched, rifle ready, as they mounted up. "Don't come back," he warned. "Ever." When they had disappeared into the darkness, Quinn finally lowered his weapon. He turned to Willa, who stood trembling in the aftermath of violence. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He could have killed you." "He was going to kill you," Willa replied simply. "I couldn't let that happen." Quinn closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into an embrace so fierce it nearly stole her breath. "Don't you ever risk yourself like that again," he murmured against her hair. Willa leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I won't if you won't," she whispered. They stood like that for several long moments, the reality of what had just occurred slowly settling around them. Barnett was dead. The immediate threat was gone, but the consequences of the night's events remained to be faced. What happens now? Willa asked when they finally separated. Quinn ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "Now we need to get you to safety more than ever. If those two talk, there will be questions. Maybe not about you specifically, but about what happened here tonight." "California," Willa said, remembering their plan. "Your friend with the supply wagon," Quinn nodded. "James should be passing through Douglas in a few days. Until then, we'll stay alert." He glanced at the small cabin. "And you'll stay here at night where it's safer." "I'll sleep in the main house in case anyone comes looking." The next days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. During daylight hours, they continued working together around the ranch, but Quinn insisted they stay within sight of each other at all times. At night, he would escort Willa to the hidden cabin, bringing her food and fresh water before returning to the main house. Despite the tension of their situation, or perhaps because of it, the connection between them deepened. Their conversations took on a new intimacy, sharing hopes and fears they might otherwise have kept guarded. Quinn told her about the nightmares that still plagued him from his time in the war, about the brother he'd lost at Gettysburg. Willa confided the shame she felt at having stayed with William despite his cruelty, her fear that she'd never escape the shadow of her past. On the 3rd night after Barnett's death, as Quinn prepared to leave the small cabin, Willa caught his hand. "Stay," she said softly. "Please." Quinn's eyes met hers, searching. "Willa, I don't want to be alone tonight," she explained, though they both knew it was more than that, much more. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll stay." They sat together on the narrow cot, a lantern casting soft light around the small space. Quinn told her about his poetry, even reciting a few lines he'd composed about the desert landscape. Willa leaned against his shoulder, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. When she turned her face up to his, the question in her eyes was unmistakable. Quinn cupped her cheek gently, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice husky. In answer, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, a cautious exploration, then deepened as years of loneliness and newfound hope converged in a single moment of connection. That night, they discovered each other slowly, reverently. In Quinn's arms, Willa found not just passion but a profound sense of homecoming. His touch erased years of painful memories, replacing them with sensations so exquisite she couldn't hold back tears. "What is it?" Quinn asked, brushing away a tear with his thumb. "Did I hurt you?" Willa shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No, just the opposite." She touched his face, memorizing the contours of his features. "I never thought I could feel like this. Safe. Cherished." Quinn kissed her again, pouring all the words he couldn't say into the gesture. They made love under the desert stars, their bodies finding a rhythm as natural as breathing, as right as coming home. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, reality began to creep back in. In 2 days, James Coopperton would arrive in Douglas. In 2 days, Willa would need to leave. "Come with me," she whispered into the darkness. Quinn was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. "To California?" he finally asked. "Yes, we could start over, together." He sighed, his breath warm against her hair. "This ranch is everything I've worked for since the war." "My future." "I know," Willa acknowledged, her heart sinking. "I shouldn't have asked." Quinn tightened his arms around her. "But a future here alone suddenly doesn't seem as appealing as it once did." Hope flared in Willa's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying." Quinn paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm saying that James Coopperton owes me more than one favor, and that California might be a fine place to sell cattle." Willa pushed herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light. "Quinn Newell, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I'm suggesting that perhaps we could find a way to clear your name properly, and that while we're working on that, we might find somewhere new to build a life. Together." Willa's heart felt too full for words. She kissed him instead, trying to convey everything she felt in that one gesture. "Is that a yes?" Quinn asked when they parted. "It's a yes," Willa confirmed. "Though I don't want you to give up your dream for me." "I'm not giving it up," Quinn said seriously. "I'm expanding it to include you. If these past days have taught me anything, it's that a ranch without someone to share it with is just land and cattle, no matter how beautiful the sun sets." The next morning, they began preparations in earnest. Quinn rode into Douglas alone to meet with James Coopperton ahead of schedule, explaining the situation and securing his friend's help. James agreed to transport them both to California, hiding Willa among his supplies and presenting Quinn as a new hire helping with the journey. Quinn returned with supplies for their journey and news that the story of Barnett's death had spread exactly as they'd hoped. A dispute between rival bounty hunters that had ended badly. No mention of Willa or Quinn's involvement had surfaced. That evening, as they packed Quinn's most treasured possessions, books, his mother's silver hairbrush, the small journal containing his poetry, Willa found herself overcome with emotion. "You're leaving so much behind," she said, looking around the cabin that had been his home for 4 years. Quinn followed her gaze, then shrugged. "Things can be replaced, land can be bought elsewhere." He took her hands in his. "What can't be replaced is this chance us." "I don't deserve you," Willa whispered. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer," Quinn countered. "And I intend to spend however long it takes proving that to you." The night before their departure, they slept in the main cabin for the last time. Quinn had arranged for Martin Holloway to purchase his cattle and lease the land until Quinn could return if he chose to return. The arrangement would provide them with funds to start anew in California. As dawn broke on their final day at the ranch, Quinn took Willa's hand and led her to the porch. Together, they watched the sun rise over the Arizona desert one last time. "Second thoughts?" Willa asked, noting his pensive expression. Quinn shook his head. "No, just saying goodbye to one chapter and hello to the next." He turned to face her. Willa, before we go, there's something I need to ask you. Her pulse quickened at the seriousness in his tone. I know we've only known each other a short time, he began, and that we're facing an uncertain future, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. This was my mother's. I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to. He took her hand. I'm not asking you to answer now. We have time. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, wherever we end up, I want to make a home with you. A real home with a garden that thrives and children to fill it with laughter. Tears blurred Willa's vision as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. I don't need time, she said. My answer is yes, now and always yes. Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then sealed their promise with a kiss as the Arizona sun bathed them in golden light. Later that day, they met James Cooperton at the arranged location outside Douglas. The burly wagon master greeted Quinn with a hearty handshake and gave Willa a respectful nod. Got everything ready, he told them, showing them the hidden compartment he'd constructed among his supplies. You'll be uncomfortable, madam, but safe until we're well away from here. Willa climbed into the hiding place, wincing as Quinn closed the false panel behind her. Darkness enveloped her, but unlike the cellar where she'd first hidden, this darkness felt like a passage to freedom rather than confinement. The journey west was arduous but uneventful. After 2 days, when James was confident they weren't being followed, Willa was allowed to ride openly on the wagon seat between the two men. The desert gave way to mountains, then to the lush valleys of California. In San Francisco, they found Willa's aunt, who welcomed them with open arms and no questions about the circumstances that had brought them to her door. Through her connections, they secured a small property in the fertile Sonoma Valley, where Quinn could raise cattle and Willa could finally plant a garden with a reasonable hope of success. It took 2 years and the help of a skilled lawyer to fully clear Willa's name. The true culprit in William's murder was eventually identified as his business partner, who had embezzled funds and killed William when threatened with exposure. By then, Quinn and Willa had established themselves in their new community, their modest ranch beginning to prosper. On a warm spring evening in 1883, 5 years after that desperate night when Willa had first knocked on Quinn's door, they sat on the porch of their California home, watching their 3-year-old son, Thomas, chase fireflies across the lawn while their infant daughter, Eleanor, slept in Willa's arms. Do you ever regret it? Willa asked. Leaving Arizona, Quinn looked at his family, then at the thriving ranch surrounding them. Not for a moment, he assured her, though I do miss those Arizona sunsets sometimes. We could visit someday, Willa suggested. Show the children where we met. Quinn smiled, reaching over to take her hand, his thumb brushing over the silver ring that had been joined by a wedding band. I'd like that, but you know what I've learned. What's that? Home isn't a place, he said, squeezing her hand. It's wherever we're together. As dusk settled over their California valley, Willa leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, grateful for the journey that had brought them here from a desperate flight across the Arizona desert, to the cellar that had sheltered her, to the love that had saved them both. In the distance, Thomas laughed as he caught a firefly in his cupped hands, the sound echoing across the land they now called home. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was, Willa thought, far better than anything she could have dreamed.